With so much information everywhere, misinformation is spreading all over the world. When you click on a social media app, you wonder how much of what you see is trustworthy. Misinformation can harm people in all kinds of ways. Many have lost confidence in scientists, government, and traditional media. As the founder of the nonprofit organization First Draft, Dr. Clair Wardle has spent years fighting disinformation and misinformation.
So I think we have to be very careful as people who are part of this information ecosystem to recognize that if none of us shared misinformation, we wouldn't have a problem.
What steps should we take to prevent the proliferation of disinformation and misinformation?
First, could you tell us what is disinformation and misinformation?
Yes, so disinformation is false or misleading content, and the people who create it and share it know that it's false and they're trying to create harm. Misinformation is also false and misleading, but the people sharing it don't realize that it's false. So that might be my mum sharing something on Facebook. She doesn't mean any harm because she doesn't know that it's false. So we need to think about those differences because we would tackle disinformation in a different way than we would tackle misinformation.
Lately, one of the biggest concerns is disinformation and misinformation about the coronavirus pandemic. Soon after news of the virus made headlines around the world, false and misleading information spread rampantly. The World Health Organization even coined the term infodemic to warn people about false stories of the virus's origin and unproven remedies which had gone viral.
I mean, they are extraordinary circumstances this year. And so because everybody has been more scared, more frightened, more on edge, and spending more time online because there's nothing else. Circumstances this year. And so because everybody has been more scared, more frightened, more on edge, and spending more time online. I mean, they are extraordinary circumstances this year. And so because everybody has been more scared, more frightened, more on edge, and spending more time online because there's nothing else to do, when your brain is in that mode, you are actually less likely to do the kind of critical checks that you would do if you were less scared. So unfortunately, not only has there been a lot of misinformation around the pandemic, but audiences have been more susceptible to that misinformation because they've been seeking answers. The thing is, even myself, I am somebody who trains in this. Does that mean that even though I train people to be critical, that I am never seduced by misinformation? Well, no, because I am human. So back in March, I was living in my studio apartment in New York City, a 400 square foot studio. I live by myself and I'm part of a Telegram group and it was full of misinformation experts. And somebody shared a post in that Telegram group that said, tomorrow there's going to be a lockdown in New York. You've got 72 hours and then the city is going to be locked down. And I saw this post and somebody said, credible source. And I was like, oh, I was in this group with people who were meant to be experts and I was living alone, suddenly thinking, I'm not going to have enough food. Who's going to look after me? And I went into just a meltdown because coronavirus was so scary. And I shared that post with 3 other people in New York City who I care about, friends. And I was like, oh my God, there's going to be a lockdown. And I slept on it. And the next day I was like, oh, no. That was because I didn't let myself do the usual checks because I was emotional.
When the public faces an information vacuum, we risk becoming susceptible to false stories on the internet.
So when people were seeking answers and they couldn't get it from the quality information ecosystem, they started seeking answers from places where people were providing those answers. And so, unfortunately, that was conspiracy websites that were telling people that the virus was a bioweapon. We found it in misinformation sites that were telling you that if you gargled with salt water or lemon, you wouldn't get coronavirus. People were giving explanations that they weren't getting from the news media or from health authorities. They're bombarded with this information, and they don't know who to trust, where to turn, what's true, what's false. And I think the lessons that I think governments, the social platforms themselves, and also journalists have learned is you can't be ambiguous during a pandemic. Even if you don't have all the answers, you need to be better at explaining to the audience what you know, what you don't know, what you will soon know, and explain the process of science to the audience.
Wardle founded First Draft, the research and advocacy organization, after years of studying social media. Building global networks of journalists and academics, she has worked on various projects, including elections in Uruguay, Spain, and Nigeria. From the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, First Draft has monitored disinformation and misinformation closely.
Just as COVID-19 has spread,
Wardle has raised awareness about the dangers of the infodemic in many forums, including the World Health Organization.
Content is new.
One of the aspects First Draft found important was how people's thirst for information easily led them to be manipulated. For example, typing the search term coronavirus facts leads you to statistics, data, and government websites. But typing coronavirus truth leads you to links to conspiracy theories.
So what we found is that people in conspiracy websites will use the word truth. This idea that you're being lied to, but that you can find the truth. Those of us who work in the quality information ecosystem, we will talk about facts. We believe in science, we believe in evidence, we believe in facts. But if you look at conspiracy websites, they will use similar language. They won't believe that they are following, crazy claims. To them, they are investigating truths that have been hidden from sight. So I think it's a really interesting thing to look at language and to just dismiss people who believe in conspiracy theories and say, you're crazy or deranged or insane. I mean, there's really problematic language that gets used to describe people who believe in conspiracies.
With the U.S. divided in the run-up to the 2020 presidential election, Wardle and First Draft were on full alert. They frequently updated a special portal reporting on disinformation and misinformation and warned journalists against being misled or spreading false information.
So in 2016, we saw actually quite a lot of outright lies. So, for example, traditionally fake news websites saying things like the Pope endorses Donald Trump. I mean, just completely made up information. But since 2016, the social media platforms have actually clamped down on those kind of falsehoods. They now work with fact checkers all around the world. So in 2020, we saw the twisting of truth. So as I said, they would take an example of a genuine incident. There was a problem with a voting machine in Philadelphia, but that didn't mean that people couldn't vote. It got fixed. But the twisting was to say, look, this machine was actually twisting votes. It was changing votes. It was a real problem. That just goes to show that it was a fraudulent election. It's only good if those interventions are being researched by independent researchers. So some of these things might have unintended consequences. So if you're taking down content, but there's no appeals process, there's no transparency about which accounts they're taking down, that has to be seen as a problem in the long run.
To combat disinformation and misinformation, Wardle believes that we as consumers of information need to know how to be vigilant against such content on a daily basis.
So as consumers, I would argue that one of the best things to do is to ensure that you have a media diet that is mixed, that you're not just consuming one outlet, but that you are consuming information from trusted sources. So news outlets that you know have a corrections policy, news outlets that you know have editorial guidelines, which means that they have an ethical way of reporting the news. The second thing is that they really should be very careful about what they share. And I often say to people, what's in it for you when you share? We know this, that the social networks are designed to give us a dopamine hit. They're designed to be addictive. Those people who are disinformation actors, those people who are really trying to push false information to cause harm, they're very small in number. They are only having an impact on society because we are sharing it. I think as consumers, we have to think, why am I sharing this? Am I helping the world? Am I making it better? Or am I potentially making it worse by spreading misinformation? And unless you're 100% sure, you really shouldn't be sharing information with anybody. What we share is based on our identity. So you've actually embarrassed the person by telling them publicly that they're wrong. The way that we should be doing this is to say to one another, and it's best not to do this publicly. It's best to do it as a private message to say, wow, I mean, I saw that you just posted that. I really understand. I mean, I'm really searching for answers myself. I've been doing my own research. I'm trying to understand this. But I'm worried that some of the things that are circulating are actually being designed by people who are trying to divide us. And actually, we have a responsibility to have conversations with each other so we're not ignoring each other, but we're holding each other to account, but in a way that's empathetic and caring as opposed to basically shaming people.
But with all these efforts by social media platforms, government agencies, and other organizations, is it even possible to eliminate disinformation and misinformation?
So unfortunately, there isn't one silver bullet. And I would say over the last 4 years, people have said, well, if only Facebook tweaked their algorithm, if only governments would regulate. And unfortunately, this is such a complex problem that we need a whole of society approach. So yes, we do need platforms to be more aggressive, but they need to be more aggressive alongside independent research. We need governments to put pressure on the platforms to release data so that we can audit the impact that these platforms are having on society. We need more literacy programs, not just at school level, but for older people who actually are the biggest problem when it comes to sharing misinformation. We need to focus on the tactics and techniques being used because that's what's going to change all the time. And I worry that we sort of focus on the facts and we fact check and it's like whack-a-mole. But we're never going to be out of the woods. There's always going to be misinformation. What we need people to understand is some people do this for financial gain, some people do this for political gain, and some people do this to connect with others for psychological or social reasons. And we need to explain that to people. What are the motivations? What are the tactics people use? I think as a globe, we need to recognize it's a global problem. But I do think that there does make sense for there to be more collaboration. And I sometimes joke that we don't have a UN agency for disinformation. And I don't know whether we do need a UN agency for disinformation, but I do think it's a problem that we don't have any organization that can compete with the platforms. The platforms are large, very, very well funded, have global reach, but we don't have anything on the other side that can really be a counterweight to the platforms. And I do think that that's a concern.
We asked Clair Wardle what she thinks is the most important aspect of winning the fight against disinformation and misinformation.
It says practice emotional skepticism. So when I say practice emotional skepticism, what I mean is if you see a piece of information and it makes you angry, or it makes you scared, or it makes you want to cry, or it makes you want to go and buy something immediately on an internet site, you're having a reaction. You're having an emotional reaction. And when you have that reaction, there's a part of your brain that stops working. You're not able to be critical because you're in this emotional state. So I think as a society, we need to stop thinking that more facts are the answer. Yes, we need more facts, but that's not going to get us out of this problem. we actually need to recognize that it's our emotions, it's the things that make us flare up, it's the things that make us feel like other people don't understand us, it's how angry we get when we think that other people don't agree with us. That's unfortunately how we're in the mess that we're in. If we could sit down with each other and talk calmly, we wouldn't be like this. So I think all of us just need to be very aware of how emotion is affecting the ways in which we interact with information online. And I don't think we have those conversations enough.